Welcome to Second Take, the show that focuses on the issues behind the news. For years, electricity market observers have been calling on South Africa to place greater emphasis on cross-border projects to help diversify its coal-heavy mix. Terence Creamer joins me to talk about recent developments that seem to indicate that moves are underway to act on this aspiration. Terence, welcome to Second Take. Do you think South Africa is becoming more serious about cross-border power trade?
Yes, I think, as you say, there's been a lot of call and appeal that we look at this cross-border energy market. And it has been on the agenda, but we also have forgotten that we were a power surplus country for many years. So South Africa was sitting with reserve margins above 30%, and imports weren't really high on the agenda. So we did have some importation coming in from Mozambique, from Cahora Bassa, at a very good price for Eskom and probably not a great price for the Mozambicans, but other than that, there hasn't really been a lot of action. We did set up the South African power pool quite a few years ago, and some trade is happening in electricity, but it's fairly limited. And I think it's the key that South Africa has to be the serious mover in this market to make it a serious trading market in terms of electricity. And we haven't really been ready until quite recently. And now we see that through the integrated resource plan for electricity, as well as the call in the new growth path and the national development plan, in just about every document that we read now for regional integration and for more regional projects, infrastructure projects to liberate trade and investment, I think that we are starting to take the issue of power importation, power trade a lot more seriously. And then obviously we're in a totally different environment now in terms of our reserve margin, which is in the single digits now. And we've got serious, we would have had serious shortages if it weren't for the economic slowdown and some of the buyback action that's been taking place. So I think that imports are on the agenda. And even in the integrated resource plan, I think there's something like 2,600 megawatts that should be imported between now and 2030.
The big prize is often held up to be the Grand Inga project in the Democratic Republic of Congo. There has been some development on this front this week.
Yes, there was a lot of excitement post-democracy in South Africa and then post-Mobutu Sese Seko going in DRC about getting this big prize, as you say, in the DRC on the Congo River. The mighty Congo River is able to, some people estimate, generates 40,000 megawatts of electricity. And it's in a carbon-constrained world, it's hydroelectricity. And the initial phases as well are quite, they don't involve big dams or anything like that. It's just diversion projects. So won't be raising the hackles of environmentalists who have problems with the dam construction. So there's a lot of benefit to the Inga, and there are a couple of power stations there already, but really upscaling that and taking that to a level where it could supply into Southern Africa, into the rest of Africa, and some people even say into Southern Europe, because there's going to be excess capacity, although Africa is starting to grow at different levels. So I think the immediate target is to try to service the markets in the region and on the continent. And, we had the Western Corridor Company, which was a 5-utility company, involved Eskom and people from Angola and the Botswana Power Corporation and the DRC SNEL. And they were looking at getting this thing going over the last few years. But it didn't actually materialize as it planned, even though quite a lot of work was done. So now what we heard this week is that our cabinet has agreed, or they've endorsed a proposed treaty between the DRC and South Africa to try and restart the Grand Inga process as a regional and continental project. I think seeing South Africa as a key market for the power, and DRC the key source, because the DRC, I think, had some problems with that multi-utility model. They didn't feel like they had, as the host country, were getting enough out of the deal. So I think they weren't always in favour of the West Core model. So this treaty seems to be trying to start on a new footing. So we've got cabinet endorsing. I imagine because it's a treaty, it needs to have legislative support, and it'll have to have support in both countries. But we're seeing movement, and basically it creates a framework for re-engaging on the Grand Inga dream, and trying to look at how we start to facilitate the development of that project in a very real way in a way that DRC is very happy with the way the process unfolds, and in a way that it can service South Africa as a key market, which is power scarce at the moment, but also all the countries of SADC. So even though it's the two countries involved, I think it has the backing and the nod of the Southern African development community as well.
But what about a power grid to facilitate the flow of electricity between the countries?
That's that's a weak link at the moment. To have trade, you have to have a grid. South Africa is something of a power island on its own with a big grid, and there are interconnected projects that have been developed over the years, but not to this level and scale that we need. So I think there's a 500 billion type SADC infrastructure plan that's starting to be thought about. And the conference last week in Mozambique wasn't very clear on this because we had President Zuma leaving early because of the disaster and the tragedy that took place at Mariaan mine. So I don't think the news flowed as was hoped. But I think there are some conferences coming up in the SADC region to try and firm up some of these cross-border infrastructure plans, and the Grand Inga one being a major one. But really to liberate those, you'll see the initial ones are about power interconnector, the grid, building a grid that's capable of being able to cope with hydro, also cope with, there's a lot more renewable coming on. Ethiopia's got massive ideas. We've got Kenya with big geothermal projects, and they're all wanting to be able to evacuate this power and trade it. And so I think a lot of the focus will be on the interconnectors during that first phase, and then I think eventually we'll evolve to looking at the Grand Inga, zero carbon Grand Inga as a major source of energy for Africa, for South Africa, for the Southern African region, and for Africa as a whole at a later stage.
Terence, thank you very much. That is the Second Take show for this week. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time for more news analysis.